What's going on? And welcome back to another episode of the Account for Life podcast. Jay Moore, the healthy accountant, helping you to account for your life. Today, we're going to pick up kind of like where we left off, continue the conversation of radical thinking. And today, why radical is considered too much. I'm going to take us back into the days of my basketball years and just kind of use basketball as some symbolism when it comes to radical and how radical, even though some people think it's too much. Radical is when you actually get what you desire and what you want. So look, man, let's jump right into this. I was sitting here thinking about radical thinking. Yeah, I was thinking about business. I was thinking about, just going hard in my life. But then I remembered way back in the day playing basketball in my youth. It was nothing like playing against the guy who was radical, like who was wild. And so when I say wild, this kind of person would basically they played hard on defense. Like this is the defensive guy who you don't want to see. And I remember at the school that I went to, and he's my friend, but I remember going against him in the beginning, and it was annoying because he loved to play defense, and he loved to play defense in such a way that it was really hard. It was really hard to like go against him because he was strong. He would body you, he would push you, and he forced you to get better. He forced you to say, okay, if this guy is going to, if he's going to D me up like this, then I'm going to have to do something else. And I just remember just how he played, but what it did was it made other people play just as hard. See, when you have an extreme way of doing something, what it does is, it's going to eliminate the people. It's going to eliminate folk. It's going to eliminate ideas that don't mix with it. But what happens in the process is you start seeing that, wait a second, something can happen. Now, I like to play defense. There's times, but I got to the point where I love to play defense. I remember during those basketball years, I remember we were going up one of the school in Pennsylvania, I think it was California University, and we went up against them, and they notoriously would beat us. We put the defense of all defense on this particular school, and they couldn't bring the ball up. We were literally just tapping the floor, getting down, rushing them, stealing the ball, and we wound up beating them by 20 because of our defense. And it was because of the one guy, my man Mo. Mo was radical on defense. He played hard, and sometimes we give each other that look. I remember, it was playing another game and we were losing. We were at home. We were losing. Team had already beat us, but we knew we can beat them. We knew we was going to beat them. And we looked up and said, you know what? Let's just put the defense on. We put the full court press on people, come back and win the game because of radical defense. But here's the thing. Some people think, oh, that's too much. Oh, that's going to make me work too hard. Oh, I want to just kind of like take it a little bit slower because it may be, just going to take me out of my comfort zone. When in all actuality, we should all think of this. Here's what we should think of. This is how I look at it. What would I like to have in my life? Do I have dreams? Do I have desires? Do I have things that I want to accomplish? And just this week, some stuff happened, family, that made me think. It made me think. Listen, radical thinking is not too much, because if and when I do think radical, I'll get there faster. I'll get what I want, and I won't have to question the fact that is it going to happen. I would know it because I'd be putting in a different way of thinking. But let's go back and look at the definition that we brought in yesterday, because I just want to bring that back so we can continue to go further into this concept. Radical thinking is the capability to think deliberately and consciously. See, that's almost saying that many of us don't think consciously. Yes, like thinking deliberately, thinking consciously. And sometimes we're not thinking consciously in the things that we say. We're not thinking consciously in the things that we do. We're not thinking consciously when we get into certain situations. And one of the things that I did this week, my mom had to go to the hospital. And you know what? I assessed the situation. See, a lot of times, sometimes we try and assess the situation based on what we've been told. And I decided to assess the situation based on a radical view. Here's my radical view. Sometimes in life, when you get put in situations, it's to help you grow. It's to expand your way of thinking. And my mom's in the hospital, and I said, that's interesting. See, because I'm never going to jump to conclusions. I'm never going to jump to, the fact that, oh my goodness. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And even if you get to the point where, you actually get, you get dealt that card that you ultimately don't want, I'm still not going to do it. So I went to see my mom and I says, hey, I'm assessing the situation. Stuff is going on, this, that, and the third. And I said, you know what, Mom? You just need some rest. This is all for rest. You needed time to rest. My mom had been taking care of my dad. And, he's just physically breaking down, but mentally he's still there. And so it's when he says, oh, you need to rest, Mom. And literally, for while she was in the hospital, they normally would have sent her home like after a couple of days. And she stayed in the hospital. She's been in the hospital since Sunday. Probably won't get out until maybe Saturday or Sunday. And yesterday, something happened that was a good reason why she was still there. And so here's the thing. It's kind of like I said, oh, this is for more rest. This is all for rest. No matter why you're there, this is for rest. See, that's a radical view, because if doctors sometimes they just look at the situation and they have to give you they have to give you that. But then for those of us who understand that in Romans 8:28, it says something very specific. For we know all things work together for the good of them who love God and are called to his purpose. So whenever something happens, it's a 828 moment. It's one of those moments when you know that all things are working for your good. And, I always look at this, I like to look at the story of the 3 Hebrew boys when Nebuchadnezzar is like, hey, you got to bow down to my statue. If you don't bow down, we're going to throw you into the fiery furnace. And they were like, oh, hey, king. Oh, we love you, but we ain't doing that. And even if you throw us in, we still ain't going to do it. And even if God does not rescue us, we still ain't going to do it. That is radical, to be facing imminent death. And you decide that, you know what, I'm going to stand on my principles. I'm going to stand on my morals. I'm going to stand on my ethics. I'm going to stand on exactly what I believe. I am not going against that. So when you have a belief, when you have a knowing of who God is in your life, we've got to act like it. We got to act it. Something crazy happened this week. I lost a client, big client. Do you know the client was replaced the same day they walked out? I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. One of my good client. It's a good client. Walks out, and on the same day, a new client walked in. Then the next day, a client that I should have had calls me back and says, hey, let me do this. Hey, and then another client, decides, hey, let me do this. So it's kind of like when all things work together for the good of them, you just got to look at what are the all things. Oh, it's all things. And if all things are working together, then a radical thinking is, remember, here's a definition. It's the capability to think deliberately and consciously. So if we think deliberately and consciously, then we don't waver. We don't go back and forth. We don't go on to something else and say, oh my goodness, this is happening to me. No, I'm going to go ahead and keep on thinking radical no matter what, just like the 3 Hebrew boys did. What did they do? They were facing imminent death. Let me ask you a question. Ask myself, if I was facing imminent death and it has something to do with my morals, my ethics, and what I believe, would I acquiesce and and say, you know what? Well, since I don't want to die, I'll just go ahead and do it. I ain't doing that. I'm not going to do that. See, most people think a radical way of thinking is too much because it forces you to be deliberate. Deliberate. It forces you to actually be conscious of that thought process, even facing situations that almost seem bleak. See, radical way of thinking, this is what it does. It turns you into the person that you could be. It turns you into the person that you were created to be. Now, rational thinking does something opposite. It only focuses on the past. It only focuses on how things worked before. It only focuses on a logical way of looking at it. It's kind of logical. What is logical? Logical is kind of like if I can chart the steps, that's logical. But if I can't chart the steps, that's radical. Because a radical way of looking at it forces you in a situation that doesn't even seem like a path. Was it Matthew chapter 7, 13 and 14? I believe that's the foundation of this radical way of thinking. What's in that verse, those verses that helps us to see that a radical way of thinking is the best way to think? Well, here's what the paraphrase version of that says. It says, starting in verse 13, it says that, for wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many people travel this road. Narrow is the way that leads to life. Few travel that road. The narrow way is the radical way of thinking because it forces you to think deliberately and consciously about what it is that you're doing. Because when we look at this last part, it says radical thinking dares to venture beyond the constraints of logic and analysis and existing frameworks. It dares to venture beyond, it's fostering creativity and innovation, and it's leading to exponential growth. That is narrow. That's the narrow path. So why radical is considered too much? Well, because most people, back up. It's not about most people. Here's what happens. You are hardwired. We are hardwired, and our brains are hardwired for comfort. That's why it's normally considered too much. Just like I talked about basketball, and I talked about how my friend who was a defensive juggernaut, that was extreme. He would foul you. He would push you. He would make you get strong. But once you realize that, you know what? Why don't I be that way too? When I got that way, I became the best defensive player on my team. I became the guy that, even though I was one of the best players on the team on both sides of the court, but it came through a radical way of thinking. But it was only after I saw that that's the best path to go down. I think there's like 116 days left in 2024. We don't know what's ahead of us. We don't know some of the things that may happen in the next 116. Here's what we do know. All things work together for the good of them who love God and called to his purpose. And I believe that many of us, especially faith-driven people, we have to take on this radical way of thinking, which is the capability to think deliberately and consciously so that we can change the world around us. Because when people change, I write this in my books when when I give someone a signed copy, I says, when we change, everything will change. Let's take on this radical way of thinking, which leads us to exponential growth in our lives, in our businesses, and in things that really matter to each and every one of us. So I hope you were blessed today by this episode. My name is Jay Moore. I'm the Healthy Accountant. I help you to account for your life. God bless, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.
This has been the Account for Your Life podcast with your host, the Healthy Accountant himself, Jay Moore. Until next time, make it a great day.